February 26th, 1959. A search party reaches the slope of Kolatsyakal, a mountain whose name means dead mountain in the Mansi language. They find a tent, half collapsed and buried in snow, but the entrance is still sealed shut. No one left through the door. Instead, the fabric has been slashed open from the inside. Long, desperate cuts made with a knife. From within, the searchers step closer. Footprints lead away from the tent. Some barefoot, some in only socks. In temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius, the footprints stretch downhill into the darkness of the forest below. And they find the bodies. 9 young people, all dead, some frozen, in bizarre positions, some barely clothed, and some missing pieces of themselves. What could make 9 experienced hikers tear open their own tent and run half naked into a frozen death? That question has haunted investigators for over 60 years. This is the DYATLOV Pass incident. To understand this mystery, we need to go back to January 1959. The Soviet Union. The city of Sverdlovsk, now called Yekaterinburg. A group of students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute were planning a skiing expedition. Their leader was Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov. He was 23 years old. An engineering student, experienced in wilderness expeditions. Respected by everyone who knew him. The group originally had 10 members. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Rustam Slobodin, Yuri Krivonishenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Alexander Solotaryov, and Yuri Yudin. Their goal was to reach Otorten, a mountain in the northern Urals. The route was classified as Category 3, the most difficult rating in the Soviet system. But these were not amateurs. Most of them had years of hiking experience. They knew the cold. They knew the terrain. They knew the risks. On January 25th, the group departed by train from Sverdlovsk. They traveled to Ivdel, a small city in the northern Ural. From there, they took a truck to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement before the wilderness. On January 27th, they began their trek into the mountains. But on the very next day, something happened. Yuri Yudin fell ill. His back pain was unbearable. He made the agonizing decision to turn back. He said goodbye to his friends. He hugged Lyudmila Dubinina and shook hands with Igor Dyatlov. He watched them disappear into the snowy forest. Yuri Yudin became the only survivor. Not because of skill, not because of strength, because of a backache. He would spend the rest of his life haunted by one question. Why did he live while his 9 friends died? The remaining 9 continued north. We know their route from diaries and photographs recovered later. On January 31st, they reached the edge of the highland area. They cached surplus food and equipment in a valley for the return trip. On February 1st, they began their ascent toward Otorten. But the weather turned against them. Strong winds, heavy snow, near zero visibility. They drifted west off their planned route. By late afternoon, they found themselves on the slope of Kolatsyakal, Dead Mountain. Rather than descend back to the forest for shelter, they decided to pitch their tent on the exposed slope. Igor Dyatlov likely wanted to maintain their position for a summit attempt the next morning. It was a reasonable decision. They had survived worse conditions before. They set up camp at approximately 5 p.m. They ate dinner. Some of them wrote in their diaries. The last photograph from a recovered camera was time-stamped around this time. It shows them digging into the snow to level a platform for the tent. They look tired, but calm. Normal. None of the photograph suggests anything was wrong. That photograph is the last known record of the DYATLOV group alive. Something happened that night. We don't know exactly when. We don't know exactly what. But sometime after dark, on February 1st, or the early hours of February 2nd, 1959, something caused sheer terror. The 9 hikers did not put on their boots. They did not put on their coats. They did not pack their gear. They took a knife and slashed their tent open from the inside. Not through the door, through the side wall. Multiple cuts, long frantic slashes, and then they ran into the darkness, into the wind, into 30 degrees below zero. Some were wearing only underwear. Some had one boot on. Some were completely barefoot. Think about that for a moment. These were experienced mountaineers. They knew that leaving your tent without proper clothing in the Ural winter meant death. It wasn't a question of probability. It was a certainty. Whatever drove them out of that tent was more terrifying than the guarantee of freezing to death. They fled downhill, approximately 5 kilometers, toward a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest. The first 2 bodies were found there. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They lay at the base of the cedar. A small dying fire had been built between them. Both were wearing almost nothing. Their hands were torn and bloody. Branches on the cedar tree were broken, up to 5 meters high. They had climbed the tree, desperately, with their bare hands, in the freezing dark. Why? What were they looking for up there? Or what were they hiding from? 3 more bodies were found between the cedar tree and the tent. Igor Dyatlov lay face up in the snow. He had grabbed a branch, frozen in place. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found 300 meters further uphill. She had been trying to crawl back to the tent. Rustam Slobodin lay nearby. He had a fracture in his skull, but the skin was unbroken, no external wound, just a cracked skull beneath perfect skin. These 5 were found in late February, but 4 hikers were still missing. It took more than 2 months to find them. On May 4th, 1959, searchers discovered the remaining 4 bodies. They were found in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree. Buried under 4 meters of snow, and this is where the case goes from strange to horrifying. Lyudmila Dubonina had massive chest trauma. Her ribs were crushed inward with a force comparable to a car crash, but there were no external bruises consistent with such damage. Even more disturbing, her tongue was missing. Her eyes were missing. Nikolai Thibeaux-Brinol had catastrophic skull fractures. Again, no external wounds that matched the severity. Alexander Kolevatov and Alexander Zolotaryov were also dead, with various injuries. Some of the clothing recovered from the ravine group tested positive for radioactive contamination. Not at dangerous levels, but present. Why would hikers in the remote Ural wilderness, be carrying radioactive clothing. The Soviet investigation began almost immediately after the first bodies were found. Lead investigator Lev Nikitich Ivanov was assigned the case. His team documented the scene meticulously. Photographs were taken. Measurements were recorded. Evidence was collected. The medical examiner, Boris Alexeyevich Vozrodyny, performed the autopsies. His findings were deeply troubling. The 5 bodies found first had all died of hypothermia. Their injuries were consistent with cold exposure and minor physical trauma. Nothing unexplainable. But the 4 bodies found in the ravine told a different story. The chest injuries on Dubinina and Zolotaryov showed a force so extreme that the doctor compared it to being hit by a car. Yet the skin showed no corresponding external damage. Dr. Vozrodyny stated under oath that no human being could have inflicted these injuries. The force required was simply too great. Then there was the matter of Dubinina's missing tongue and eyes. Some have argued this was simply decomposition. The bodies were buried under snow and water for months. Scavenging animals could have been responsible, but others point out that specific soft tissue removal is unusual for natural decomposition. The radioactive contamination added another layer of mystery. 2 items of clothing showed beta radiation. Krivonyshenko had previously worked at a nuclear facility in Chelyabinsk 40. This could explain some contamination. But why was the radiation spread across clothing worn by different group members? Investigator Ivanov also recorded something strange. Multiple witnesses, both independent hikers and local Mansi people, reported seeing strange orange spheres in the sky over the Kholat-Syakhl area in February 1959. Bright, silent, slow-moving orb. Ivanov initially included these reports in the case file. He was soon ordered to classify the entire investigation. The case was officially closed on May 28, 1959. The final verdict was deliberately vague. The 9 hikers had died due to, quote, a compelling natural force which they were not able to overcome. That was it. No explanation of what that force was. No further investigation allowed. The case files were sealed. They remained classified for over 30 years. When the files were finally opened in the 1990s, several pages were missing. Who removed them? What did they contain? We still don't know. Over the decades, dozens of theories have been proposed. Some are scientific. Some are conspiratorial. And some are truly terrifying. The most widely accepted theory today involves an avalanche. In 2021, researchers from Switzerland used advanced modeling to show that a delayed slab avalanche could have struck the tent. The snow slab wouldn't have been large enough to bury them, but it had been heavy enough to crush the chests of those sleeping nearest the slope. In panic, the group would have cut their way out and fled downhill. Unable to return in the dark and wind, they froze. It's clean. It's logical. But it doesn't explain everything. Why was only some of the clothing radioactive? Why were there no typical avalanche debris patterns? And what about the missing tongue? Another theory involves infrasound. Strong winds passing over the mountain's domed shape could create low-frequency sound waves. Infrasound at certain frequencies causes panic, disorientation, and an overwhelming urge to flee. The hikers may have experienced sudden, irrational terror, not from any visible threat, but from sound waves they couldn't even consciously hear. This would explain the desperate, illogical flight from the tent. Military testing is another popular theory. The Soviet Union conducted extensive weapons testing in the Ural region, parachute mines, rocket fuel tests, radiological experiments. Some researchers believe the group accidentally wandered into an active testing zone. The injuries, internal crushing without external marks, are consistent with blast wave trauma. The radioactive clothing supports this theory, and it would explain why the investigation was classified so quickly. The Mansi people, indigenous to the region, had their own explanation. They called the mountain Kholat Syakhl for a reason, Dead Mountain. They said it was a place of death long before the DYATLOV group arrived. Mansi elders spoke of spirits that protected the mountain. They warned outsiders not to climb it. Soviet investigators interrogated several Mansi people, but found no evidence of foul play. Still, the Mansi had always known. Some places are not meant for the living. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the case. 60 years after the incident, they announced that they were investigating 3 possible causes: an avalanche, a snow slab, and a hurricane-force wind event. In 2020, they concluded it was an avalanche. Case closed. Again. But many researchers reject this conclusion. The evidence simply doesn't fit neatly into any single explanation. And that is what makes the DYATLOV Pass incident so enduring. It resists explanation. Every theory answers some questions, but raises new ones. If it was an avalanche, why did they not return to the tent once the danger passed? If it was infrasound, why has it never been documented causing death before? If it was military testing, why has no whistleblower ever come forward in over 60 years? Yuri Yudin, the 10th hiker who turned back, spent his entire life trying to understand what killed his friends. He examined the evidence. He visited the site. He spoke to investigators and journalists. He never found an answer. Yudin died in 2013 at the age of 75. He was buried with a heavy heart and unanswered questions. The DYATLOV Pass has become one of the most investigated unsolved cases in history. Books, films, documentaries, expeditions, and yet the mountain keeps its secret. 9 people entered that wilderness with everything they needed to survive: skill, experience, the preparation. Something on that mountain was stronger than all of it. Something that made experienced hikers choose certain death in the cold over one more second inside that tent. The mountain the Mansi people called Dead Mountain earned its name long ago. And on the night of February 1st, 1959, it proved that name was not a legend. It was a warning. One that 9 people heard too late. DYATLOV Pass incident remains one of history's most chilling, unsolved mysteries. 9 lives lost. If this story kept you awake, subscribe to Dark Archive. If we uncover the cases that the world tried to forget. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. Because some mysteries don't stay buried on frozen mountains. Sometimes They follow you home. See you in the next one.